I ask a lot of questions, and some of that comes from an incredible teacher I had 25 years ago. His name was Bonner Ritchie. And Bonner was always living on the edge of two different worlds. So he was an American, and during the civil rights movement, he was deeply engaged with helping African Americans launch catfish farms to be able to have an income. And he was part of a very difficult conflict between the black and white people in the U.S. And then later on, he actually was also very involved with the Palestine or the Middle East peace talks, and personally advised Yasser Arafat in some of the initial peace talk conversations that were there. But the point is, Bonner was always provoking me in a personal way and in a professional way with different questions. And he'd always ask questions that would be unsettling, that I hadn't quite thought of, that provoked me to think twice about whatever I was thinking about. And I admired him a lot for that. We became good friends. He was a teacher in graduate school. And so I've always tried to remember Bonner in terms of that questioning capacity and his ability to ask his way into a problem and figure out what would be a good solution where two people just fundamentally cannot agree with each other. I had a mother who was exceptional, and her father, who was my grandfather, they both watched the world carefully. So my grandfather was a sheriff of a small town called Park City, Utah, in the western part of the United States. And this was during the Prohibition, when in the U.S. in the 1930s there was no alcohol or liquor allowed. And there was all kinds of conflicts in the town, but my grandfather prided himself that he never had to pull his weapon or his gun in order to make somebody do something. He would watch them carefully enough to know why they were doing it, and then he would talk them out of things. And my mother was the same way. She was always watching people and trying to understand, really, how could I make this better? And so that was a piece that I picked up myself. The thing that I don't do well is experimentation, in the sense that this comes to my father's side, which my father was a master. He was a musician, a carpenter, a mechanic, and he could do all kinds of things exceptionally well. And whenever we were building something, there was this task he would give me, even as a 4 or 5-year-old, where I would have to hammer nails into boards in a row in a straight line. And as a 4 and 5-year-old, you're hammering, and when you've got the nail, inevitably the nail will bend over. And my dad always told me to pull the nail out and start over with the straight nail. Well, when you're 4 or 5 years old, when that nail bends over, all you do, you just hit the nail harder, and you pound that nail so that it disappears, or you think it disappears. And my father would always come along, and he would see that, and he would say, "Hal, if you're not going to do it right the first time, it's not worth doing at all." Which is the opposite, of prototyping and experimenting and trying new things. And so that's probably my weaker side, is the experimentation piece. One provocative question is, whatever the work is that we're doing, so in this case, you're running a website, and you're trying to bring the best things of the world to make a better world, and you have an audience that currently exists, and there are people who are logging on and taking advantage of the things that you're giving to them. So one question would be, what if you could no longer, what if everybody who currently has access to your website was completely cut off? How would you redeploy or reuse everything you've learned for an entirely different set of people? And who would they be that you currently have no connection to, but if you were forced into it, where would you go? So that's not a Bonner question, but it was a question that one executive used in order to get a very different direction in where their company was going. Andy Grove and other senior executives at Intel, at one point, when they were trying to decide to move from memory chips to microprocessors, one of the questions that they ask themselves is, if we were fired today, in other words, if the CEO, me, and the chairman of the board, you, if we were both fired today, what would our replacement do if they were taking our roles right now? And the question made them realize they were holding on too hard to the things of the past, and they weren't letting go. And asking the question led them down an entirely different direction as a company, because they were able to, again, step back, see it differently from the question. We're all individually human, and we are unique people. And it's not so much the question we ask that matters, it's the question that we're living that matters. And one of the most profound things, at least in my life, as I've walked into the world of innovators, social innovators, and other innovators, is it's forced me to rethink, what questions am I asking? And what questions am I asking over and over that at some point define my life? And so if I were to think back, what's a life-defining question for me 10 or 15 years ago, before moving solidly into this social innovation world, my personal question, and it's a bit embarrassing to admit, to be honest, but my personal question would be more around how can I please other people? And if I ask that question enough, it leads to behaviors that are trying to answer that question. But as I watch these social innovators who do phenomenal things for all kinds of people in the world, often people who are living on the margins of society, they're asking different questions. And it forced me to rethink, what question do I really want to be asking? And that one then is, what difference can I make right here, right now? It's a different question. And for me, it's helped change my life to start asking a different question. And so my question for me in my journey, through life is, how can I make a difference here and now? I was just in Germany last week with a really good friend. And he's an incredibly creative individual who's trying to change many things in the world. And he's often thinking of the question, what wants to emerge in a situation? So what wants to come out of what's happening right now? It's almost a Buddhist-like framework of what wants to emerge here. And he steps back and he watches very carefully. I don't have a quick answer to your question. I know what I care about in this innovation space, and it's more of an outcome than a question. And that is, I know that most questions, most creativity gets killed when kids grow up. Educational systems are masters at doing it. Families, to some degree, do a great job of crushing creativity. Communities do. Religious systems can do the same thing. And so the deck is stacked against us. The forces are against us to keep these inherent skills that enable us to answer life's problems. They're creativity skills. They answer life's problems. Personal, professional, societal, they're the answers. And so I've had the chance to move, and live in a number of different places. And more recently, we've moved to the Middle East. And it's caused me to think carefully, again, about how people, when they're young, have these creativity, especially questioning skills, shut down. And then for me, it's an even more profound problem for young women, young girls. And so, for me, if there's any gift that I could give someday through this Innovator's DNA work, is that, there are more adults who are behaving more creatively. And because of that, they might then, encourage young people to do the same, and and hopefully young women, young girls, that they will speak out, that they will ask provocative questions, that they will, make profound observations of the world and be heard. And so to me, it's in one sense, I want to somehow create a world where these innovation skills don't die as people grow up. This wonderful, fantastic organization in Cape Town, South Africa. It's called Handspring Puppetry. And they make puppets, and they've just won several Tony Awards for a play on Broadway called War Horse. And they make these incredible puppets, horses and giraffes and animals and people, that are as real as the real things when you watch them on the stage. You forget they're puppets. And as I was talking to the founders of that company, they put it profoundly, that their work with those puppets is trying to give voice to animals and people who don't have a voice. And for me, these creativity skills do the same thing. To get students in the classroom to be creative and to help foster these skills is creating an environment where these skills can thrive and flourish. Now, I've got a lot of respect for Montessori method. It's a schooling approach where kids come into a space. It's multi-level ages, so you have different age groups in the same classroom. That means they're teaching each other about a particular issue. It's project-centered, where they're moving from project to project trying to learn about something. It's curiosity-driven. It's not teacher-driven, it's curiosity-driven. I'm interested in this. What's going on here? How could I explain this better? They're encouraged to do experiments and to figure out, how could this work better, to make very careful observations. And so that Montessori method as an approach has incredible value in generating innovative people. About half of the people that we interviewed either had Montessori education or something like that as they were growing up. So the co-founders of Google had that kind of experience growing up. Several others, many others. And again, they had this environment that fostered it. And so, if I were to think of a teacher that can support this, it's a teacher who's maybe teaching 6-year-old children and isn't troubled by a 6-year-old asking the question, "Teacher, why when you put a seed in the ground does the green part grow up and that root part grow down? Why does that happen?" That's a 6-year-old question. They're trying to figure out the world. And if a teacher says, "We don't have time for your question," or "That question's not important," it's over. Kids learn really fast to stop asking questions. And so for me, one of the core elements is, how can we create an environment that encourages, fosters, supports kids asking questions? If you think of 4-year-olds who ask lots of questions, I was really impressed with a researcher who once said, framed it differently for me, and the question is, why do 4-year-olds keep asking the same question? And his answer caused me to step back and think twice. He said, the reason that they keep asking the same question is because we as adults didn't hear what they were asking. And they're asking it again because those kids are convinced we weren't listening. And when I thought about it, I thought, most of the time, he's right. And we just laugh about it. They're just being 4-year-olds, and you know the story. But in fact, it caused me with my own grandchildren to think twice when they're asking questions, to really listen. What are they asking me right now? I believed this before we started the project, which started about 8 years ago. And we interviewed about 100 different entrepreneurs who had created companies that often had disrupted and changed entire industries. And I believed before, but it was an aha that this is really so, and that is, innovation in an organization starts at the top. if the leaders of an organization don't behave innovatively, the rest of the place isn't going to either. And so for me, it was watching and hearing these people who had created these incredibly successful companies. It was hearing them describe their everyday actions that just spoke in volumes that this stuff matters, do it. Ask questions, you can see me do it. Make careful enough observations so that we're really giving the client or the consumer or whatever the end person is, we're giving them something good that they would value. So for me, it was a deep reinforcement of how important senior leaders, how important it is for senior leaders to behave innovatively. The second piece is, many of those senior leaders didn't know how they did what they did. So some of them were very articulate and they could describe in good detail, this is how I get new ideas. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, he knows that experimentation, trying things and figuring out a way, that's how you get new ideas. And as a result, he's able to teach that because he understands it and he teaches it to his people, and they teach it throughout the organization that experimentation matters. Whereas other executives, they couldn't describe what they did, and they couldn't really teach other people to do it. So the organization was stuck depending on them to get the new ideas. And in that case, it doesn't have a sustainable future. So, part of it was just, I was surprised that some of these really innovative people, they really don't understand how they get ideas, but they do. Which is great for them, but it doesn't help build an organization of other people who can do the same thing. I'm in the middle of putting together a global network of artists who use their craft, be it cinematography, photography, sculpture, dance, theater, a whole variety of art forms. They use that to create positive social change, and none of them are put together to create the next world-class ballerina, or a best-in-the-world sculptor, or a winner of an Academy Award movie. That's not the point. The point is that when these kids and young people around the world learn art skills, they not only learn they have to learn to see the world differently, to create interesting art, and they learn how to do that, and they get engaged with something. It's fascinating to watch kids who live in an artless world move to a space where they can actually try some art form and get a little expertise at it. Their eyes light up. They're excited. They're interested in the world. They're engaged with the world. And so what happens is they learn sometimes for the first time in their life what it means to just be fascinated by what you're doing and completely lost in it. And then they end up doing something else in their life, but they have the confidence that comes from having done a piece of art or a sculpture or a great picture that they can say, that's mine, and I've done that, and I learned how to do it. It has a powerful spillover effect. He was a relative expert in starting to create interactivity between people taking these surveys and giving them prompts, emails to remind them to take the survey. And how do I get people to respond more often to the surveys? That's what he's trying to figure out. And so he then bumped into a friend who was running a project trying to help kids who were just out of prison to stop going back into prison. Once they get out, how do we keep them out? And they were talking about things, and it was like, his friend was saying, if we could only figure out how to coach and help these kids so that they don't do it again. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off in this survey assessment business owner's head. And it was, what if we did automated coaching of these kids? In other words, what if we had an automated system that gave the kids coaching feedback over their mobile cell phones? And so they tried it and tried different prototypes, and they got a system that worked. And here's how it worked. So I get out of prison, I set some goals around, I'm not going to do violent things, I'm not going to do drugs, I'm not going to do these sorts of things. These are my goals. I'm going to report back on those every week. And if I don't meet them, I'm going to get an automated cell phone message from my friends and my family, reminding me of how important those goals are. And if I do achieve them, I'm going to get an automated cell phone message that tells me that they're really proud of me and they're glad that I'm progressing and doing well. So that's the context for the story. But basically, the thing that made it all worth it was I believe it was in Los Angeles. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure it was in Los Angeles. There was a gang member who had just got out of prison. And either a relative or one of his good friends had just been killed after he got out of prison by a rival gang member. He was literally getting into his car, had his guns ready. He was going to go and get revenge and kill this other gang member. They're driving on the way to do this. His cell phone rings. And it's a message from his grandmother. And the message is, this is your grandmother. I love you. You've got 2 kids. Don't do anything stupid. I love you and I want you around. That was the message, basically. And he got that, flicked his phone off, turned the car around. Didn't do it. And that may seem like a simple thing, but here are 2 people, somebody running youth prison programs, somebody running a business for online surveys, coming together in a relatively random conversation, creating an inventive solution to a problem, which is how do you keep kids from doing stupid things and going back to prison, and literally in this case, saving 2 lives, if not more. I think the moments that I will share, all humanity does live. We all live with death, others and our own. And we all live with love. Either we love people or we don't. And the death story is it's a story about people no longer paying attention, living an automatic life. A little over 10 years ago, my first wife had breast cancer. She was diagnosed, had surgery, radiation, things were fine. Everything seemed to be fine. 2 years later, she started getting sick. She had severe itching going on. I mean, severe itching. Itching everywhere. Every part of her body was itching. So she went to a dermatologist who misdiagnosed the problem. She went to an internal medicine doctor who misdiagnosed the problem. So several specialists tried to fix the problem just by looking at it through their specialist lens. But they never really paid attention to the patient. And there came a point where she had been awake for 2 solid weeks, no rest, because the itching was so bad. Her skin was turning yellow, and it was unbearable. So she ended up going to an osteopathic doctor, which is a wholeness sort of focused doctor. And the first thing that doctor did was ask her some questions. And then she did what any good doctor would do, which is she did a basic physical examination. She touched her body. And as soon as she did, she knew that something was profoundly wrong with her liver, because it was literally 2 or 3 times the size that it should have been by touch. And we immediately went to the hospital, had the scans done, diagnosed with cancer coming back, completely through her body, and I think it was 13 days after that diagnosis, she passed away. And I look back on that, there's a lot of stories there, but one is, I don't know if that had to happen, because doctors, if they had just been paying more attention, if they'd been more fully engaged with the work that they were doing, the people they were working with, could have saved a life potentially. And so for me, it was a profound experience and a reminder around not going on automatic pilot in the work that we do in life, especially professionally. I don't care who we are or what we do. Not letting it get that settled that we don't pay careful attention. I remarried after my first wife passed away, and we have this incredible relationship where the most profoundly enjoyable experience is actually traveling, say, to a city like Lisbon that we're in right now. And it's not so much following a tourist itinerary as it is just being. And there's no greater joy than starting out a day in Mallorca and intending to go to the other side of the island, and probably traveling no more than maybe a half a kilometer, and seeing a sign that says there's an interesting monastery over there, going to it and staying there until sunset. Just being and taking in the world. I mean, that's the kind of life she's given to me. And so, if I think of when do I feel most deeply in love with her, it's when we're just being. Which, when I step back, it's not just somebody that I'm married to, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing with strangers. There's this really uncomfortable dynamic in parts of the Middle East. And that is, you have this very distinct hierarchy of life form. That locals, are the top, the local people, the local nationals, they're the top. And then you get, different sort of nationalities that have more or less importance. Does that make any sense? There's just sort of a hierarchy of nationality. And the other day, I was driving, and I realized that I was making driving judgments about who to let in and who not, who to let cross the walk and who not, based upon nationality. Which means I had dropped into the problem I had just described. I was running on automatic pilot by the culture I lived in, and I was starting to judge people by their nationality and make judgments about their value and how important they were. And when I realized that, it just scared me. It's like, I can't believe this is going on. And it made me step back and be for a moment and just remember they're all human, just like I am. And respect them and honor them as being that way.